The sun hung merciless in the bleached sky above Dry Creek, its rays beating down on the parched earth like hammer blows on an anvil. Eli Rollins squinted against the glare as his horse picked its way along the dusty trail that served as the town's main approach. The animal's hooves kicked up small clouds of red dust that clung to everything: his worn leather chaps, his faded blue shirt, the week's worth of stubble on his jaw. He'd been riding since dawn from his ranch 40 miles north, all for a few sacks of barley. The drought had hit hard that year, harder than most, and his horses needed feed. Town was the last place he wanted to be. But necessity had a way of deciding things for a man. Dry Creek appeared ahead like a scattering of bones across the desert floor. False-fronted buildings lined the street, paint faded and peeling under the relentless sun. A few horses stood tied at hitching posts, their heads low, tails flicking at flies. The smell of dust, horse sweat, and something sour, probably from the saloon, hung heavy in the still air as he rode down the main road. Eli dismounted in front of Morrison's general store, looping his horse's reins around the post. He patted the animal's neck, feeling the heat radiating from its coat. "Won't be long, boy," he murmured, then climbed the steps to the boardwalk. Inside, the air was stale but shaded. Shelves lined the walls, holding everything from canned peaches to rifle cartridges. The floorboards creaked as he approached the counter where Chester Morrison, the store's proprietor, was talking with two ranchers. "Told her last week I can't extend no more credit," Morrison was saying, voice sharp with self-importance. "Woman's got to learn to manage better is all." One of the ranchers, Tom Garrett from the Double K, spat into the brass spittoon. "Miriam Harper's always been trouble, even before her husband died." "Died?" the other man snorted. "That's a kind way of putting it." Eli cleared his throat. "Afternoon. Need 3 sacks of barley if you've got them." Morrison turned, his merchant's smile snapping into place. "Eli Rollins! Haven't seen you in town for months!" 3 sacks. $12. Quote. Eli counted out the bills, but before Morrison could take them, the doorbell chimed. The men fell silent. A woman stepped in, and the air seemed to shift. She was younger than Eli expected, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and wearing a faded calico dress. But it was the way she carried herself that caught his eye. Her back straight, chin high, moving with quiet dignity that dared anyone to pity her. "Mr. Morrison," she said softly, "I need flour, salt, and a tin of lard, please." "Cash up front, Mrs. Harper," Morrison said coldly. "You know that." "I understand." She reached into her small purse and set a few coins on the counter. Eli could tell from where he stood. It wasn't enough. Morrison counted the coins slow, deliberate. "This'll cover half the flour, maybe the salt, no lard." Color rose in her cheeks, but her voice didn't waver. "Then I'll take what it covers." Tom Garrett chuckled. "Maybe you should consider other ways of earning money, Widow Harper. Gotta make your way somehow." The woman turned toward him, fire flashing in her eyes. "I manage honestly, Mr. Garrett, which is more than some can say." "Honest women don't poison their husbands," the third man muttered, loud enough for all to hear. Eli saw her hands tremble slightly as she turned back to Morrison. "My flour and salt, please." Morrison's smile turned mean. "Prices have gone up, you understand? These coins might buy you a cup of flour, if that." Eli had seen enough. He stepped forward and dropped 2 silver dollars on the counter. "Add what the lady needs to my order." The store went silent. Miriam Harper looked up at him, pride and desperation warring in her dark eyes. Up close, he saw the hollows in her cheeks, the careful mending in her dress. "I can't accept." "Not accepting anything," Eli said quietly. "Store made an error in my favor last time I was here. This squares us up. Isn't that right, Morrison?" Morrison flushed. He remembered Eli's reputation for being steady with his fists and steady with his gun. "If you say so, Rollins." Eli nodded toward Miriam. "Ma'am, tell him what else you need." Quote. For a heartbeat, she didn't move, as if waiting for a trick. Then she drew a breath. "Flour, salt, lard, and a small bag of sugar for my daughter." "Whatever you need," Eli said. He turned away, giving her privacy while Morrison filled the order. The other men muttered, but said nothing more. Eli felt their stares boring into his back. He'd marked himself now, taken the side of the town's outcast. So be it. When she was done, Miriam paused beside him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll find a way to repay you." "No need," he replied, tipping his hat. She studied him for a moment, searching for the price behind his kindness, and then left. Through the dusty window, Eli watched her walk down the street, head high despite the gossip that followed her. "You've made a mistake, Rollins," Morrison said once she was gone. "That woman's nothing but trouble." "Seems to me," Eli answered, "a woman trying to feed her child in a town full of men who'd rather see her starve isn't the one making trouble." He paid for his barley and stepped back into the scorching light. Down the street, he saw Miriam's small figure disappear around the corner toward the poor end of town. He'd come to Dry Creek for barley, not to meddle in other folks' lives. But as he mounted his horse and turned toward home, her face stayed with him. The defiance, the dignity, the quiet hurt. He told himself it didn't matter. Told himself he'd done his part. But deep down, Eli Rollins knew something had shifted. He'd gone to town for grain, and somehow he was riding away with a thought he couldn't shake, and a feeling that might just change his life forever. 3 days passed before Eli Rollins found himself riding the road back to Dry Creek. He told himself he needed to check on a horse he'd seen at the livery, maybe pick up tobacco. But when he found himself loading a small sack of seed corn and another of beans into his saddlebags, he stopped pretending. The Harper place looked worse than he remembered. The fence posts leaned at odd angles, held together by wire and stubbornness. The yard was a patch of cracked earth and weeds, the house a tired old thing sagging under the weight of years and neglect. He dismounted at the gate, tying his horse loosely to the post. There was movement inside, soft, cautious. Before he could knock, the door opened. Miriam Harper stood there, a kitchen knife in her hand and suspicion in her eyes. When she recognized him, confusion softened her face. "Mr. Rollins?" "Eli," he said. "Eli Rollins." "What brings you here?" He nodded toward the saddlebags. "Had extra seed lying around. Thought maybe you could use it." He hesitated, feeling suddenly foolish. Garden like yours could make it through this drought with the right start. She didn't lower the knife. "Thought maybe the poor widow could use some charity." He shook his head. "Thought someone trying to keep a garden alive could use seed that'd just go to waste in my barn." For a long moment they just stood there, measuring each other in the silence. Then she stepped aside. "I suppose you'd better come in." The interior of the house was bare but clean. A table with 3 mismatched chairs, a small stove, a few shelves holding dishes, and the supplies he'd helped her buy. It wasn't much, but it spoke of pride, a woman fighting to keep her dignity despite the world's judgment. Sarah, Miriam called, and a little girl appeared from the back room, 6, maybe 7 years old, with her mother's dark hair and eyes too serious for her age. "We have a visitor." The child studied Eli quietly, then gave a small curtsy. It nearly broke his heart. "Would you like some water?" Miriam asked. "I'm fine," he said. "Just wanted to drop the seed, maybe show you a few tricks for planting in this soil, if you're interested." Her fingers tightened around the knife before she finally set it down. "You can show me." They went outside. The heat was merciless, the earth dry and cracked. Together they worked, Eli kneeling to dig small trenches, showing her how to channel what little moisture the soil still held, how to mound the dirt to protect the seedlings from wind. Sarah followed behind, solemnly carrying handfuls of seed in her apron. Miriam worked hard, her movements precise and steady, though Eli could tell she was exhausted. Every few minutes she had to pause and catch her breath. He wanted to tell her to rest, but he knew better. Pride was the only thing she had left, and he wouldn't take it from her. When they finished, he stood and wiped sweat from his brow. "That's enough for today. Seeds need time to settle before watering." Miriam straightened, her hair sticking to her neck, her dress dust-streaked but her posture unbroken. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed, just neighborly help." She gave a small, tight smile. No one else in town would call it that. Then the town's got poor manners." Her laugh was short and bitter. "You don't know what they think of me, Mr. Rollins. They believe I killed my husband." Eli met her gaze steadily. "Did you?" She blinked, startled by the bluntness of the question. Then she sighed and sank onto the porch step, looking suddenly much younger. "Would it matter if I said no?" "Might." She looked out across the empty yard. Ben Harper was a hard man, drank too much, hit harder. That last night, he came home wild with rage, said he'd lost money gambling, blamed me somehow. He raised his hand to Sarah. Her voice wavered, just once. I stopped him, told him to do what he wanted to me, but he'd never touch her again. He laughed, left the house, said he'd be back with his gun to settle things. Her fingers toyed with the hem of her apron. He never came back. They found him 3 days later at the bottom of Crater Gorge. Horse came home without him. The sheriff said he'd been drinking. Probably rode too close to the edge, but his brother swore I must have done something, poisoned him, drove him mad. There was a trial, she continued. They couldn't prove anything, because there was nothing to prove, but around here a jury's verdict don't matter half as much as gossip. She looked up at him then, her eyes haunted but defiant. "So no, I didn't kill him, but I didn't mourn him either. Does that make me guilty?" "Makes you honest," Eli said quietly. Sarah had come closer while her mother spoke, small fingers clutching the folds of Miriam's skirt. The protective way Miriam's arm went around her daughter said more than any words could. Eli nodded toward the freshly planted garden. "Keep those watered after sundown. Don't waste it on the heat of the day." Miriam watched him for a long moment as he gathered his tools. "Why are you doing this?" quote. He hesitated. "My brother died 5 years back. I wasn't there when he needed me. Told myself after that I'd never stand by again when I could do something." Her expression softened. "That's a heavy promise to carry." "Maybe, but it keeps me straight." He started to mount his horse when a small voice called out behind him, "Mr. Cowboy!" He turned. Sarah stood barefoot on the porch, her face serious. "Are you a good man or a bad man?" "Sarah," Miriam said sharply, but Eli just smiled faintly. "I try to be good," he said. "Don't always succeed." The little girl frowned. "Mama says good men don't hurt little girls, but the men in town say bad things to Mama, and they're supposed to be good men." Eli's chest tightened. He dismounted and crouched to her level. "Sometimes people get confused about what good and bad mean, Sarah. They listen to stories instead of truth. Your mama's a good woman. Don't let anyone tell you different." Sarah nodded solemnly, then surprised him by wrapping her small arms around his neck in a quick hug before darting back to her mother. Eli touched the brim of his hat. "Evenin', ma'am." Miriam's voice trembled when she answered, "Evenin', Mr. Rollins." He rode away into the deepening dusk, but the image of that fragile home stayed with him, the weary woman with fire in her eyes, the brave child who asked too many true questions. That night, thunder rolled in from the mountains. Rain fell hard and fast, wind howling through the canyon. Eli stood on his porch, watching the storm, and thought of their leaky roof, their bare walls, that small child's frightened eyes. He told himself it wasn't his concern, but when lightning flashed again, close and mean, he was already saddling his horse. The ride was near suicide. The wind tore at him, the rain stung like needles, the trail a river of mud. But he didn't stop until the Harper house loomed ahead through sheets of rain. He heard the child crying before he reached the porch. The door was half off its hinges. Water poured through gaps in the roof. Miriam was moving frantically, trying to save what she could. Pots and buckets scattered everywhere. "Let me help!" Eli shouted over the storm. She spun, startled. Then relief flickered in her eyes before she masked it. "Roof's giving in. I can't stop it." "Grab what you need. We're getting out of here. Barn first, then we'll think." She didn't argue, just grabbed a bundle of clothes and the few dry provisions left. Eli scooped up Sarah, who clung to him, crying into his shoulder. Together they stumbled through the storm to the barn, slamming the door against the wind. The barn was drafty but dry enough. Eli built a small fire in a metal bucket, Miriam sat with Sarah in her lap, both of them shivering. Eli shrugged off his damp coat and draped it over them. "I can't take," Miriam began. "You can, and you will," he said. "That child's cold." They sat close, the fire crackling, the storm roaring outside. Slowly, Sarah's crying faded. Miriam looked across the flickering light at Eli. Her face was pale, her hair soaked, but her eyes held a quiet gratitude that words couldn't touch. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible over the wind. "It's gone, isn't it? The house. Roof's gone, walls still stand. We'll fix what can be fixed." She gave a broken laugh. "With what? I've nothing left." Quote, "We'll figure something out." "We?" she asked, her eyes meeting his across the fire. "Yeah," Eli said softly. "We." "Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know." Morning came pale and cold after the storm. The sky washed clean, the land glistening under a thin veil of mist. Eli stepped out of the barn, surveying the damage. The Harper house was half collapsed. The roof caved in where the wind had hit hardest, walls warped and buckled from rain. It was worse than he'd feared, but not beyond saving. When Miriam joined him, her hair tied back and her hands raw from working through the night, he turned toward her. "I can patch what's left for now," he said, "but I'll need to ride to my ranch, get tools and lumber." She nodded, her face unreadable. "You've done enough, Mr. Rollins." He studied her, the proud tilt of her chin despite exhaustion. "Maybe, but I'm not done yet." They worked side by side that morning, clearing debris and setting aside anything salvageable. Sarah carried smaller things, blankets, dishes, the few books that hadn't been ruined. Every small act of rebuilding felt like defiance, a quiet refusal to give up. By midday, the heat returned, and Eli wiped sweat from his brow. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said, securing a tarp over the largest hole in the roof. "You shouldn't," Miriam said quietly. "The town won't like it." "I've never cared much for what towns like or don't." Quote. Her lips trembled, but she only said, "Be careful." When he returned the next morning with a wagon full of lumber, the whispers had already begun. By the time he reached the Harper place, he could feel eyes on his back from the road, watching, judging, waiting. Miriam stood on the porch when he arrived, a pot of thin coffee waiting. "You're stubborn," she said simply. "So I've been told." They began work again, and slowly the broken house started to take shape. Eli showed her how to fit the new beams, how to brace the frame, how to test for strength. Sarah fetched nails and water, her laughter slowly returning with each passing day. By the fourth afternoon, the roof was standing again. The house was far from new, but it was whole and safe. That night, Miriam made beans and cornbread for supper, simple but warm. They sat at the table, Sarah dozing in a chair beside them, while outside the desert turned gold under the setting sun. "You should go home," Miriam said softly. Eli set his coffee cup down. "You want me to?" "No," she admitted, "but it would be easier. For both of us." Quote, "Easier's not always right," he said. The next morning, 3 riders approached while Eli was repairing the barn door. Sheriff Watson, Tom Garrett, and Pike Stevens. They reined in their horses, faces grim. "Rollins," the sheriff called, "got some concerns from the folks in town." Eli straightened, hammer in hand. "About what?" "About this arrangement," Garrett sneered. "An unmarried man spending his days with a widow known for killing her husband. It don't look right." Eli's jaw tightened. "Seems to me what looks right and what is right ain't always the same thing." Stevens spat tobacco near Eli's boots. "You'd best watch yourself. Decent people don't take kindly to this kind of thing." "Decent people," Eli said slowly, "would have helped a woman with a child instead of gossiping while her roof fell in." Before anyone could answer, Miriam stepped out onto the porch. Her dress was patched, her hands blistered, but her voice was clear. "If you men came to help, there's plenty of work. If not, kindly get off my land." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Watson cleared his throat. "We just want to keep the peace." Then start by letting folks live their lives, Eli said. The men exchanged looks but turned their horses without another word. When the dust settled, Miriam sagged against the porch railing. You've made enemies now. Never did like them much anyway. That night, while Sarah slept, Miriam walked Eli to his wagon. The moon hung low, turning her hair to silver. I won't have you ruined because of me, she said. He smiled faintly. Already was ruined. Just didn't know it till I met you. Her breath caught. Don't say things you don't mean. I mean every word. He stepped closer, so close he could see the faint shimmer of tears in her eyes. You said once that truth doesn't fix roofs or buy food. Maybe not, but it's worth something. And here's mine. I care about you, Miriam. You and that little girl both. She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, Why? Because you remind me what decent looks like. Because Sarah asked me if I was a good man, and I want to be able to tell her yes. Quote. The space between them disappeared. He reached out, his hand brushing her cheek. For the first time, she didn't pull away. Stay for supper, she said softly. They ate by lamplight, Sarah's small laughter filling the quiet house. For the first time in years, Miriam allowed herself to believe in something like peace. When Eli left that night, he promised to return the next day. And he did. Every day after, helping with chores, fixing fences, teaching Sarah to ride the gentlest mare from his herd. Days bled into weeks until it no longer felt like charity, but life. Then one evening, as the sky turned crimson over the hills, Miriam stood on the porch with her hands folded before her. Eli, she said, her voice trembling, I've made up my mind. Sarah and I can't stay here anymore. It's not safe. The things they say, the looks, the threats. He took a step toward her. Then come with me. What? Come to my ranch. Both of you. There's room and it's safe. Let them talk if they want. They've been talking anyway. Her lips parted, shock and hope warring on her face. Eli, people will always find something to hate. Let them. You and Sarah don't belong here anymore. You belong somewhere you can rest. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she nodded. All right. They moved the next morning. By sunset, Miriam and Sarah were unpacking in a small but cozy ranch house, surrounded by open land and quiet. Sarah ran through the grass laughing, her hair catching the light. Miriam stood on the porch beside Eli, watching her daughter play. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. He looked at her with quiet conviction. You already have. That night, after Sarah fell asleep, Miriam stood in the doorway watching Eli by the firelight. I'm frightened, she admitted softly. He turned to her. Of what? Of hoping for too much. Eli crossed the room, stopping just in front of her. You're allowed to hope, Miriam. Her voice barely carried. And what do you hope for, Eli Rollins? He met her eyes. You, Sarah. A home that finally feels full. She swallowed hard and her next words trembled. Then maybe we're hoping for the same thing. He touched her cheek and this time she didn't stop him. Their first kiss was slow, hesitant, full of everything they hadn't dared say. When it ended, she rested her forehead against his chest and he wrapped his arms around her. Outside, the wind sighed through the cottonwoods, carrying away the last remnants of gossip and fear. Inside, two hearts that had known only loneliness found peace at last. The cowboy had come to town for grain, but he'd left with something far greater. A purpose, a home, and a love that would change his life's path forever.